My name's Henry, and I've been code-free for about 273 days. So our next speaker is CIO of Data and AI at Deutsche Bank's corporate bank. She's also a fellow at the British Computer Society and the Forward Institute. I've done my fair share of data mapping projects in my time. And earlier in the year, I read an article about data mapping in a much more expansive sense. So our next speaker was bringing in language from Cartography, the original mappers. And many of you will know I'm a great fan of going off to other disciplines and stealing their best ideas. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. Please welcome our next speaker to the stage, Simone Steele.
Thanks, Henry. Good morning, everyone. I hope by the end of this talk, you're not going to hate me, because I'm going to say something quite controversial to start with. The timer is being reset. I think I'm going to be on time. Why is it going to be controversial? Because here we build code as output of our work, or maybe even outcome of our work. But I wanted to cover the output of our work. Actually, most digital businesses, and I'm sure fintech companies, are 100% digital, and everything we have as assets, as liabilities, is recorded somewhere digitally. That's the purpose of our output, is to actually maintain, curate, create results with data. Just so you know where I'm coming from, I studied computing, then economics, then data science over a long, long time, and worked for some data and technology services, building software just as a business and selling data as a business. But most of my experience comes from the financial services, working in IT functions within banks, and in change functions sometimes, where data is now, especially in the last 10 years, seen as one of the main liabilities. Everybody talks about the value of data. The data is new gold, new oxygen, new oil. But in fact, technology is still the machine that builds that. So what I wanted to talk about is some of the illusions that I see, and apologies for the wordy corporate style kind of presentation. And by the way, this is not Deutsche Bank's presentation, it's mine as a BCS fellow. I wanted to talk about these three main issues of misunderstanding, illusions, that data is kind of ready for us to unleash AI. Not AI for us as developers or engineers or change agents, but AI for the business operation, for what your business delivers. And what we do normally in big companies is that we look at the ROI of a particular investment, and actually we only see the upside, very little, even people without free tokens know that we have huge costs with any initiative, AI or not AI. But the hype is pushing automation under the guises of AI at a faster pace than we can explain where the data pitfalls live. So there is a misunderstanding of availability, of quality, of control of data that is being overlooked. The second illusion is that we have quite a lot, I would say, of knowledge that creates the ability to grow faster. And back to Martin's call, we are facing cognitive debt around the data footprint of big businesses. Too many copies, too many versions of copies. And the regulation in financial services is catching up with that, not just the EU AI Act, but the cyber risk and many others that are coming. And we are losing the ability to explain what's going on. So enough of the entire system knowledge and technical debt, it applies to data as well. And finally, we are relying, for that explanation of sometimes knowledge we have lost, we are relying heavily on catalogs of data classes, data flows, data dictionaries, data models, logical, physical, as a means to explain what's happening to the business. And I'm calling it an illusion or a fallacy because that is not reality. This is a projection of what we think is reality. So I might have my data flows well documented between various systems, but actually we are shipping code every day. That reality might change over several months. And when I do my next data flow reviews, it might be a year later. And it might not be explaining anything reasonable. So these dysfunctions, these illusions for me, called out for some realization from my business stakeholders, from my chief operating officer, my chief financial officer, that actually this is impacting now the success of your business. But I didn't have a language to do that. And why did I need to do that? In budget discussions, actually this talk should be called Follow the Money, right? Because in budget discussions, in investment discussions, in challenges for how much it costs to run IT for large business, you have no language at all. You have presentations, you have spreadsheets, and you have very passionate arguments. With personalities, with celebrities in your business, oh, that person always wins and always has hundreds of millions to invest. And there is no way of bringing reality to the fore without being the naysayer. So we don't want to be naysayers around agentic AI for coding, but we also don't want to be naysayers about AI for business because the data is not quite right. They are just going to find someone that says, yes, the data is right, and replace you with that person. So the languages that we have, or some of us have, are entity relationship diagrams that may be supporting documentation of your code. I kind of argue that most people start from the data classes descriptions themselves and reverse engineer that. So this is kind of old-fashioned. We have quite a lot of graph technologies with dynamic nodes that you can pull and the edges stretch and move around, and we're thinking, oh, now that's ontology, and that's really, really much better. And then we have things that we use every day to find this venue, which are real maps, right? So that kind of language, an infinite number of other languages, I'm just picking 3 here, right? But that language is a natural communication language for people that are not engineers, they are not data professionals, and they are in charge of making decisions that impact you. So I think that one is the only one readable, but that, for us, is a cartoon. Right, but why is that so jarring, right? It's not technical enough. Let's go through this a little bit, and maybe we'll warm up to it. That's what I mean by data cartography. It's the mapping of your terrain with the lens of data. And yeah, beginning with the reification fallacy, right? We know a map, and I'm looking at this floor, and it's got this kind of topology look to it. The map is not the terrain, but it represents very well of unknown terrain that you must navigate. And from that principle, I thought, what if the problems with data, the duplication, the lack of controls, the deterioration of quality, the migration, the mapping challenges, what if those are so abstract that the easiest thing for every executive to do is to abstract the problem away? And I began to pull that thread via the mechanism of mapping. Because if I decide to meet with you at a Pret somewhere in the city, I might as well have a map because there are like 100 in a square mile here, right? So we need precision. We need to be able to communicate with people making decisions without abstracting away the problem. And what I thought were good things about maps that I wanted to kind of recycle from other disciplines is, first, spatial awareness was my thing. Spatial awareness, data has no space. Systems have no space. This logical connection between things and the physical connection is still virtual. And we needed to find a way to communicate, are things close by, are things far apart, from a quality perspective, a relationship perspective. We don't have big landmarks. Again, everything may have a system name, but these are not fixed landmarks. They move around, and sometimes in big organizations, things get rebranded, renamed, replaced. So we lose landmarks. We have no sense of scope and level of scale of the problem. So some systems may have billions of transactions a week, while others take 1 quarter to close a deal, right? So in financial services, you may know, payment rails, or exchange activity on the stock exchange may have, 25 million exchanges a second. And the scale of that problem is very different from being the custodian of digital assets that happens once a year for a big client. So we don't have the sense of scale with systems and with data. And we don't really understand how things connect with each other. We may see, maybe an API strategy or a messaging strategy with some low latency tags on it, but we don't see it. We see proxies for it, we see dashboards, and we see indicators. So we don't know how things are really connected. And then a heat map to see, do we see disruption in this data transportation or dynamics? So what I thought is, are these disciplines here applicable to our problem? And by the way, this has not been battle tested or proven. Perhaps it sits better as a white paper that we can discuss as an industry. But I think there are some benefits of this approach, because there is utility. I can see how I can use this approach to get funding for the right part of the system that might need to be decommissioned, or sponsorship for AI application in some problematic processes that are failing their data quality. So I found that being able to locate what the topic is that I want to talk about is very important, but the map cannot change. The map can be zoomed in and zoomed out, but it cannot change, otherwise it's no longer a map. Otherwise, each one of us brings a map to try to find each other and never meet. So visualization of bottlenecks and business cases in the map are super important, rather than in an abstract, I want to sell more, cross-sell, upsell. Like, where does it live? Do I understand the impact that I'm causing by trying to change my business targets? Sharing a mental model, I think it goes without saying, that's why we are a little bit lost. And the scale here, from a different perspective, we might need very much a detailed picture of where we are operating, or we may need a high-level picture. And I don't know if there's anyone from Google here, but I always use Google Maps as an example. We can see the Earth, or we can see the website for this conference room in this hotel, in the same map. I just need to get to the right scale, right? So there is some work to be done here for me to say, can I take this to a business discussion, or can I just stay within my engineering team to support perhaps the introduction of a new component? And finally, to really, where are your risks? We need to understand the weakest link here, because there are so many overlaid concerns in software engineering and in systems. It might be vulnerabilities that you need to fix. It might be the emerging regulation that I spoke about before, or it might be a market opportunity that I cannot pass. But can I see if I have fragility in the system? Do I have in my heat map a place where transactions are always late? Do I have in my map issues with, every time you go into daylight saving time, different from between UK and America, some batch will break overnight, right? So we have some utility in this map for a lot of us. And so very quickly on some of the more specific concepts, keeping an eye on time. These are the elements, the grammar. Let's say we decide to build maps for data, which actually are maps for systems as well, but data against the output of our output. How would that translate to a COO or a CFO, right? I need to convey how do they see distance between common business objects, common business concepts. And I know most of you are probably financial services, so I try to create an example that, maybe is neutral enough, and, have perhaps some reference data here with end-of-day rules, with time zone rules, and where your businesses are regulated, for example. How do you manage your transactions and your balances, and how do they associate themselves with your customer, your prospects, or your sanctions customers, right? And those distances kind of matter. I don't know if they're right or wrong, but that's the point. If you put it on a piece of paper, virtual paper, you can say, well, actually, that's not quite right, and you can refine it. The visual primitives that I'm using here are just simple conventions that we need to decide and make them emerge in a consistent way, right? So having very bizarre notations that are very technically useful but not business friendly defies the purpose of the conversation, right? So colors, they must mean something. Icons and paths they need to be developed for that purpose. Layering and annotating is very important because politically we all own parts of this diagram, right? So there is my territory here, is my borough, or I'm the mayor of end of day or whatever it is, right? So I do have here some power dynamics, right? And there's some disputed ownership, potentially around customer. Oh, this is mid-cap companies, these are small enterprises, these are large institutionals, and this is my territory. I'm the head of emerging markets in Asia. And so you can see that we will have to layer some concerns for this to be at all useful. And finally, the interactions I was talking about. To navigate scale, you need to know what level to pitch. I lost many audiences, hopefully not this one yet, but like many audiences by zooming at the wrong level. Going in too quickly on my decommissioning pain points and not understanding that that was a layer too low for the financial discussion I should be having. Like, am I going to pay another $1 million for this vendor, for this legacy for another year? Yeah. So with that, this is very boring. I'm not going to talk about this. Just to try to show that, there are certain useful properties of other languages. Of course there are. But they might be needed, they might be necessary, but they're definitely not sufficient. And I'm just trying to maybe oversell here that we need to cater for the needs. And, did I go backwards? No, I did not go backwards. Here we go. So what I wanted to place is one question that actually makes us care. Yeah, so what was the question for me? Maybe there was a dispute here about who we got some balances wrong and the regulators are coming in and scrutinizing things, and then we look at each other and say, who owns this problem, right? And who owns this problem from a technical perspective? Maybe 20 systems that keep touching the account balance for many good reasons, especially reasons that go back 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever. There are schematics that may show who is the official data owner in that company, right? Who owns this from a data regulation perspective? who is the person that unfortunately was tagged with BCBS 239 ownership of that particular data class. But actually, the power play, who actually makes the call on the investment in the area that is going wrong, might be completely different. So I think that is why questions like this need language that facilitate resolution. And it's all about data, right? It doesn't really matter. The P&L is even the P&L is data. So you don't get it right, it's a big stakes. So let's say I enter a budget meeting with my business case in a PowerPoint and a spreadsheet with a pretend return on investment because nobody checks afterwards, and the conversation doesn't go very well. Excuse me. Why doesn't it go very well? Because we have separate slide decks. I should have put this at the top. Everybody comes in, presents a case, gets grilled, maybe gets squeezed on the money, and then next person comes in with another case, a different style spreadsheet, a different style PowerPoint, the next person. And then at the end, the executives are so exhausted that all they do is like, you know what, everybody asks, just cut 10% and just give it to them, right? And then we miss the opportunity for them to understand how each one of their needs is impacting. Perhaps there is a heat map around here because they are all wanting to put change on top of change. And that may need to be sequenced. So you don't need all that money at the same time. You need first things first, second things last. Sorry. That conversation may not go very well for other reasons, not just because they can't see each other, but because the language is not precise enough, or even doesn't need to be precise, but needs to be understood. Right? So if you open the Oxford Dictionary, I'm sure there isn't a single definition for every single word. You have many, many different definitions, examples and definitions applied in context, and we are facing a map can show in a single entity what we want it to mean, but it does not replace semantics. So that is a layered conversation, it's a scale conversation. And the example here is I have 3 different teams that have 3 different versions of customer. And let's not even talk about the difference between customer and client, because I spend half my professional life and people say, no, it's not a client, it's a customer. So it does take quite a lot of effort to have a meaningful conversation. A map can help, but again, is needed and necessary, but maybe not sufficient. And it is a bit of a health warning. There are some bigger prizes here that are coming with AI. I probably went down a LinkedIn rabbit hole, and everything I get is about semantics and ontology. I don't know, am I the only one in this rabbit hole? Like, you guys get a lot more closure and other things, right? Mine is really ontology and semantics right now. So pay attention. This is the health warning. And what I'm trying to do now is take one step at a time. Because if it's a novel idea that hasn't been battle tested, hasn't been used in industry, first of all, you might be forming quite a lot of opinions about how good or rubbish this is, right? And I intend to create a discipline in the industry that makes it stronger for more meaningful conversations in the age of AI. Because if we don't know where we're going, we don't know where we are, it's very hard to put AI in there and get a good result, right? We might be able to talk about this later in the panel, right? So my first step is to get a data domain and create a conversation around something simple. Nothing simple, but like maybe unique. Identify these data zones, because we don't actually see them. And we need to get people within other disciplines, not just technology, to just put on my architects, right? We're just going to create our own version of the truth and say that's the right version of the truth. It's not. Understand the language that you really need to use. If you have systems that mean so much, you better put them as landmarks, because if they're not there, your credibility is already gone. That's the tough one. Number 4, draw paths, connections, dependencies. That is the human part, because we don't think things are connected in the same way. So hard work to do that, but worthwhile, right? Because if I took the Thames link to Blackfriars today, and if there is a service disruption, I need to know, so I go to a different station instead, right? So what are these paths? What are the paths that matter? And how can I create now the layer of responsibility? A lot to do, but I think it's very worthwhile because we have all the tools that we need. We have, I just put Draw.io there just as an example. I can draw maps from my XML that my architects help me put together for starter for 10, and I can programmatically create my resource definition that could be even machine interpretable, machine readable, and useful for AI or other things, right? So I don't want to have 2 versions of reality. That's what has caused quite a lot of problems with data regulation. We want to live on the same map. And that is really what I'm pursuing now. I'm hoping that it creates some enthusiasm and motivation for you to see what is your map in your organization and how could you have better conversations about data with that. And that's it from me. I'm just saying, if I could get to that green sentence, that's where we are. That's where we need to invest first. This is what we can't afford to do at the same time on that same place. I think this will be a great result for the maps. Thank you.
I just want to ask, graphs in your understanding are not deliberately placed in canvas, right? There is no understanding of near or far, and so on.
And they are dynamic, right? People love the fact that you can pull them and everything adjusts, and so it's hard to say, yes, where am I?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, that was the idea.
So there is no, it's not constant, basically, the relationship between the nodes. It's, if you place a node to the left, somebody else could pull it out and put it on the right.
Yeah, that's correct.
As long as the connection is still there, then...
That's exactly what I meant, yeah.
Okay, because I've worked for a company some years back, and we did graphs that actually are in Canvas and do have like the map kind of relationship.
Spatial meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Where as you say, it's more like a map where you cannot just take out a road or a building and place it somewhere else.
Because distance matters. Distance logically matters, right? I have in one particular critical payments flow 61 systems, and that has to be the most low latency thing in the universe. So how does it get to 61 systems, right? There is distance there. So yeah, you got it.
Thank you for a really interesting talk. Now, this is probably a technical question, but I should say I'm coming from a background of working with Ordnance Survey research and development many years ago, and my PhD was in spatial representation and reasoning. So this is great. But the I suppose the thing I'd throw out there is that back in the day when I was in that space, we'd talk about different types of maps based on their sort of, their mathematical invariance. Mm-hmm. So they're sort of the topological map, we'd sort of shorthand call it for, but it's like London Underground kind of thing. Its only connection is the invariant there. Or we got like distance metrics. Now, I would just sort of add to the vocabulary, suggest we could add to the vocabulary by considering, say, the different types of maps. And I've found that actually lots of people do get this, because I think London Underground is a very powerful, example.
Topological
but,
example.
I was just wondering, so really it's throwing it out there to say that certainly in spatial representation and reasoning, that we talk about types of maps based on their sort of, their invariance. And you said about scale, of course. The scale, it's not that does impose, it's like an aggregate relationship, and it's sort of always, there's choice in there as what is aggregated or not.
And especially if it's topological, not topographical, you would have the scale, it's approximate, right? We know from the London Underground map, there's some stations you shouldn't really get onto another line and go around. You just go over ground and you get there in 5 minutes. Like, especially if you're changing from the Piccadilly line or Bakerloo that is really deep, you spend more time changing like this than walking to your destination. So it's a wonderful book. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called Mathematics, as in map and mathematics, mathematics. And it does create such a rich understanding for people who have not worked in this industry, to understand the differences and the potential. Because I think we might not need to lift wholesale an existing discipline, but we need to tap into the things that are relevant. So maybe relative position might be better than relative distance, but it would depend on your context, I'm sure. Yeah, but thanks for that. I might have to open this for some collaboration if I then connect with event organizers to try to get some of your ideas to develop this further.
Thank you. It seems to me like one of the most important and undocumented things we could map in an organization is connections between people. Right? And I'm not talking about the org chart. I'm talking about the fact that I in engineering know Vanessa in marketing and we chat about things, right?
Yeah.
But that also seems almost impossible to map. Do you think we've got any hope? Do you think it's worth doing? Or should we just stick to data because that's a hard enough problem?
I was trying to solve the data problem because that for me is the outcome of what IT produces. So I'm thinking about when we talk about producing code, I think of us building machines in a production line. And when I think about data, I'm thinking about the actual product that your machines that we've built are producing. And that for me was underrepresented and not understood. But as you were saying, the actual organization is communication. Yeah, and that sits on top of those maps. But the roles are so different, the responsibilities are so different. I think there might be layers that are super important. It's just the scale, right? Are we looking at the earth, or are we looking at on the ground to the entities that are actually operating the business? I saw many years ago, I think Microsoft created this first analysis of people interaction via emails and chats and things, and had these heat maps and these blobs of interaction. And I looked at it in fascination, and I said, what do I do with that? Right, what do I reshape my organization? So it's a tougher question, because then if you know, what do you do with it? Is it because you want to optimize for it, or want to use that to leverage for some other decision? So this is a very interesting question. No answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we ran out of time, overstayed for about 4 minutes, but thank you very much. Thank you.